This is the Blood Red podcast from the Liverpool Echo, giving you the inside track on all the big talking points from Anfield.
Hello and welcome to this week's Liverpool.com podcast. I'm Matt Addison. Michael Plant and Richard Garnett are with me as we discuss Mohamed Salah and his comments over the weekend and Liverpool's win over Inter Milan in the San Siro. Before we get stuck into that though, don't forget to get the best discount off your NordVPN plan. You can go to nordvpn.com/bloodred. Our link gives you 4 extra months on the 2-year plan, and there's no risk with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. The link, as ever, is in the podcast episode description box below. We are going to start, Michael, with the win at Inter. We will come to Mohamed Salah. I'm sure people want us to talk about that as well. But without Mohamed Salah, Liverpool looked pretty good in the Champions League. It was an important win, I think, for them in the context of the group, but an important win as well for Arne Slot in the context of this week and the difficulties that he and his players will have had to deal with after conceding late at Leeds and then obviously everything that Salah had said. But yeah, it was an impressive and important win in Europe for Liverpool. And we've said this a few times this season, but a step in the right direction, I would say.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that everything that happened from Saturday night at Leeds really overshadowed what an important game it was for Liverpool, because the win now, I think, puts them in a brilliant position to make that top 8. And if they'd have even drawn last night, that would have looked a lot more difficult. And a defeat, I borderline think, would have made it not impossible, but very, very difficult, bordering on impossible. So it was a huge match, huge 3 points for the Reds. And I think from Slot and from Liverpool's perspective, they will be just delighted that there's something positive to talk about after what has been a roller coaster, 72 hours or 48 hours or however long it's been since that Leeds game. And look, I thought the performance was good. I thought it was defensively brilliant. I thought in terms of creativity and on the ball and actually making things happen, it wasn't all that fantastic. But I suppose that when you go to a side like Inter, that's okay, that you've got to make sure that you're resolute, difficult to beat, and it gives you a platform from which you can win a football match. And that's ultimately what Liverpool did. I think the penalty was a bit of a farce at the end. I don't think anybody really thinks that was a penalty. But ultimately, it's really changed the perspective, I think, of that game. And there's a really positive feeling on the back of that win now. And hopefully, from a Liverpool perspective, they would be able to bring it into the weekend against Brighton.
Yeah, it felt like an important win. There was a lot of chance for Arne Slot in the crowd, Rich. There was a couple of flags that we spotted from a couple of Inter fans who had Mohamed Salah and Egypt flags, but it very much felt like the Liverpool fans were on the side of the Liverpool manager, and the players as well, I think, showed that with the way that they performed. There was a lot of hard work and running that went into it. They executed the plan that Liverpool had put together and deservedly got the 3 points. I know that the penalty was a little bit soft, but I think the Canate header being ruled out was probably a little bit harsh as well. So maybe the two things equal each other out. But yeah, it was a good performance, wasn't it? And finally, just good to see Liverpool look a little bit more competent defensively.
Well, let's get one thing straight. The very soft penalty was perhaps justice for a very suspect referee performance against Inter Milan in 1965, I think it was. Which you won't remember, but if you look it up, I think Liverpool were winning the European Cup semi-final from the second leg and mysteriously lost the second leg under very dubious circumstances. So if it was a bit soft, we'll take it on this occasion. I also think, as you say, Konate's goal was probably a legitimate goal as well. So although I do agree it wasn't a penalty, a little bit of luck has evened itself out there. I think God knows Liverpool needed a little bit of luck. But overall, I mean, to be honest, that is exactly the type of performance and reaction that Arne Slot needed from his team and his players and from his supporters. Because in the immediate aftermath of the Salah saga on Saturday, my initial thoughts were he's lost the dressing room. He's lost the respect of the players, and one of his most senior stars has broken rank here. And if Liverpool had not given their manager the reaction that he needed, then, I did say on Saturday he could be gone by Christmas. Now, he still could be gone by Christmas if results don't go his way. I mean, a great result last night, but it is only one result. But the key thing was the reaction was there from his players. They did not look like a team that was down tools, as they have done at certain points over the last few weeks, in my opinion. It was a fantastic response. It was a compact team that didn't look like conceding a goal, quite frankly. All right, the game was a little bit boring, but I think Liverpool need boring at the moment to just try and get themselves back on track. And in the end, they've come away with a fantastic result at San Siro. I don't think Inter had lost at home to European opponents in 3 years. I think they won 15 of the last 17 matches, something like that. So that shows you how big a result it is. And the message to the manager was clear, I think, from the supporters. They backed him. The players have turned up for him. And the message is, if we stick together here, we can salvage something out of this season. And I don't think it's a particularly good look for the player that they left behind.
Yeah, we will talk a little bit more detail of, what Salah said and that kind of thing in a few minutes. But just in terms of Arne Slot, Michael, in terms of the changes, we saw a slightly different system from him. The midfield was a little bit more packed. I thought that really helped Gravenberch and McAllister in terms of plugging those gaps. And I think Virgil van Dijk said it afterwards on Amazon Prime in the coverage in the UK, where, if you've got those players in front of you, you can maybe shield the defence a little bit more. Obviously, Andy Robertson played pretty well. Joe Gomez on the other side as well. We know the limitations of some of these players. Obviously, Joe Gomez is not going to be throwing in crosses like Trent Alexander-Arnold, or Andy Robertson isn't going to be up and down the pitch in the way that maybe in an ideal world Liverpool would like. But just to have those two banks of four, obviously the goalkeeper behind them, the front two maybe were a little bit isolated, and maybe that's a little bit of a different story. But just as a platform to be solid defensively, to keep a clean sheet against a team that I think has scored about 32 goals so in 14 Serie A games so far this season. This is an Inter team that can score goals. And yet, out of nowhere, Liverpool kept a clean sheet.
Yeah, and I don't think there's anything wrong with making yourself solid and difficult to beat. And then, as I said earlier, it gives you a platform from which you can win a football match. It actually goes against a lot of what we've seen from Slot in this 18 months as Liverpool head coach. He has typically looked to overwhelm teams offensively, and that's how he wins football matches. But at the moment, that's just not possible. I think it is intriguing. I don't want to go too much into Salah, but I don't think Liverpool could have played that way last night if Mohamed Salah would have been involved, for instance. And there were similar setup, some significant differences, but a similar setup to the way he played against Frankfurt earlier this season. And I do just wonder whether maybe he's going to look to play a little bit more like that in the long term, that kind of solid four, and then pick your moments to attack. And I thought it was interesting, his substitutes, because I think if he'd have wanted to had a bit more creativity, he would have started with Wirtz, probably would have started with Kirkes and Bradley, but instead he went for, as you said, a more solid approach. But then, with 20 minutes remaining or however long it was, he then did throw on Wirtz, Bradley to try and win the game. And actually, Wirtz, I thought did really well. Obviously, won the penalty. As I like you calling it soft. That's an interesting word to use. Soft is equals absolutely in no way ever a penalty. But and then but he had some bright moments on the ball, Wirtz, and also thought Conor Bradley had some good moments as well. He obviously had that shot that was well saved by Sommer, and actually within a couple of minutes, or even in a minute of him coming on, he fired a cross in. So maybe Slot deserves credit as well for the timing of those substitutes, that getting to the 60-70 minute mark and then looking to try and win the game, and that's ultimately what Liverpool did. But to come back to what I said before, they're now in a brilliant position in the Champions League campaign. Those final two matches against Marseille, which Marseille should be a difficult enough assignment, I think, but then you've got Karabag at home. You would fancy Liverpool to take 6 points from those final two games, and if they do that, they will be in, 99.9% sure they'll be in the top 8. So, and that would be, everything considered, how this season has gone, that would be a real achievement, I think.
Yeah, it certainly would. I think from the perspective of, they've had some ups and downs already in the Champions League group. When you think of, beating Real Madrid and then losing in the manner that they did against PSV. I mean, we did see it with PSG, didn't we, last season? Arne Slot spoke a lot about them and how they transformed in the second half of the season. So I'm sure that'd be something that he would want to see from his team. I mean, in terms of this kind of 4-4-2, a bit of a diamond system, Rich. I mean, long term, you can see maybe Milos Kerkez and Conor Bradley, or Jeremy Frimpong, if he's fit and back available, they could offer a little bit of width. You can see that maybe Florian Wirtz, it would work for him to play in that system where there's a bit more stability behind him and he can have that freedom. We didn't quite see as much from the front two, but, Isak and Ekitike in time you'd expect will get better. Is this kind of setup something that you'd like to see maybe at the weekend against Brighton, maybe, for the period that Salah is away and maybe if Salah is to move on, whether that's near or far in the future, maybe this is a setup that Arne Slot could look to use a little bit more often?
Yeah, I think so. I think the key point is that out of possession, they look compact. And that should hopefully prevent the situation we've seen where the team's fallen behind to goals and given themselves a bit of a mountain to climb. So it is very pragmatic, but I do very much feel like that's what Liverpool need at this moment in time. Do I envisage a side which hasn't got Florian Wirtz in it from the start? Well, I don't think that's ideal. You'd want to play him, certainly want to start him in more games than you didn't. I totally get the idea behind not starting him last night, and his impact along with Bradley's was absolutely key, and came just at the right time. So you'd have to say he's got his tactics spot on there. And going forward, I'd expect both of those players to be starters, but certainly at this moment in time, I think Liverpool looked a lot more solid. And it is kind of interchangeable as well, isn't it? And I guess this is one of the sort of benefits of having a shape that hasn't got Mohamed Salah in it, in that some of these players are a bit more interchangeable, and you can, if you need to change it or move them around, you can do that. Now, I'm not saying you can't do that with Mo Salah on the side, but you kind of really, these days, I know he used to play a couple of different positions across the line. That doesn't really happen anymore, does it? He just seems to play the one position, and sometimes perhaps could have come off in games when he didn't and stuff like that. But now he's got, I think, with this shape and obviously they're going to be without him anyway during AFCON. It's something that looks a little bit more interchangeable, a bit more flexible. As I said, it's not exciting, but I don't think that's going to matter if you start getting results. But the real test, I think, is how that would work against a Brighton side that will have done its homework on how to beat Liverpool and how differently that setup is going to be compared to some of the recent failures of the very near past. Because Liverpool just haven't been able to string together a good run a good run of performances, never mind results. Results they were getting early in the season without even playing well. But we need to see sort of a run of solid performances, and clean sheets or only conceding one has got to be the way to go. And that's what obviously they looked all right against Leeds, I thought, on Saturday until Konate goes to ground, and it all kind of sort of folded like a pack of cards from there, didn't it? But I think a bit of stability is definitely what we need, and a compact shape. And if it means we have to grind out a few 1-0s or 2-0s, then so be it.
Yeah, I think that is a key point, isn't it, with Konate? I looked at the formation and thought that does look a lot more stable and it looks a lot better, and suddenly that gives Liverpool a platform. But I mean, the formation was nothing to do with Konate going to ground against Leeds and for no reason sliding in and taking somebody out. It doesn't matter what system you're playing. If you've got those individual errors, then it doesn't quite matter in the same way. But let's move on to talk then about Mohamed Salah in a little bit more detail. I know a lot of people have had their say on it across the last few days, but it is going to rumble on, and not least because Arne Slot knows he will be asked pretty much exclusively about Mohamed Salah on Friday in the press conference, Michael. It's such a big story and such an interesting topic to get into in a variety of ways. But, I mean, first and foremost, Liverpool won the game without him. That was important for Arne Slot. Mm-hmm. To me, that sets up, whether Liverpool decide that he's going to be a part of the matchday squad or not at the weekend. He's probably not going to play a huge amount in the game, given that if Liverpool played like this midweek, that's probably what they're going to do again. And as you've said a couple of times already, it's just not a way of playing that suits Mohamed Salah.
No, and that brings up bigger long-term questions, which I suppose I hinted at earlier a little bit. I think you're right. I certainly can't envisage him starting against Brighton. That really would be a quick turnaround, wouldn't it? I thought it was interesting, Slot's comments last night. I mean, we were recording this on Wednesday, but after the match, he didn't say a word for word, but the implication was, well, Salah needs to come to me and apologise. That seemed to be what he was saying on Amazon Prime. And I think that the logical next step really is that Salah just trains and heads to AFCON on, I think it's Monday. And, it's just a natural break for everyone. Everyone can breathe a little bit, let the dust settle, and perhaps pick this up in 2-3 weeks' time and see where we're at. Salah doesn't seem to be particularly remorseful, I would say, at the moment, based on his social media post on Tuesday afternoon or Tuesday morning. What kind of message are you trying to send? I think it was, I'm sure we'll get into our opinions on what was said. I thought it was, I agree with Jamie Carragher's verdict on a lot of it, and I do think it was pretty disgraceful, to be honest with you, what he said and the way he conducted himself. But look, listen, we all make mistakes, and if you're kind of big enough to hold your hands up and move on from it, then I think that's doable. But so far, the implication from Salah is that he doesn't look like he really wants to do that. So as you said, it's going to rumble on for weeks and weeks, I think.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of things that were said that you could barely believe that had come out of his mouth as he was saying them. But I think the biggest thing for me was that he seems to have in his head that he is such a big legend of the club, and what he's done for the past 5, 6, 7 years mean that he should still be in the team now. And I think you can argue with a lot of what he said. I think some of it was fair and some of it was accurate. The implication from him, for example, that maybe 1 or 2 other players should have been taken out of the team because they've not been performing, and maybe he has been taken out more quickly than others. Okay, yeah, there's an argument maybe in 1 or 2 of those positions. But the idea, Rich, that Mohamed Salah should be in the Liverpool team no matter how he's performing because of what he's done in the past, I just don't think anybody is ever going to agree with that. And it just reminded me very much of a Cristiano Ronaldo type mentality of almost being bigger than the team and better than the team. And the one thing we know that Liverpool fans won't stand for is anybody being bigger than the club. So it's created a little bit of division, hasn't it? I think within the Liverpool fan base, some on Salah's side, some on the club / Arne Slot side. What was your take on it? Not just now in hindsight, having had a few days to think about it, but when that interview first came out, were you as shocked as everybody else?
I was, and if the viewpoint is that he should be in the team, because of what his past achievements are, well, you might as well play in Russian John Barnes, hadn't you? But nothing lasts forever, does it? But look, there's 2 sides to this, but my view on it is pretty steadfast, to be honest. I'm in the same camp as Michael. Some of the things that he said, some of the points that he made, particularly around perhaps other players, him being the fall guy when other players haven't been performing as well, they may carry some weight, but they're not for our ears. You know what I mean? That is a conversation that should be between him and the manager, not going crying to the press. Because what he's effectively done, you said, and you've just touched on that anyway, Matt, in that you said it's divided some opinion within the Liverpool fan base, some of which sort of a pro Salah side, of being very critical of the press for their opinions on it, which has tended to be more, leaning towards the manager. What he's effectively done is he's pitted the fans, him versus the manager. And however he intended to do that or not, that is exactly what has happened. And that's just unacceptable. That you can't do that. You can't do that. Liverpool have been struggling enough as it is. They spent a lot of money in the summer. Expectations were sky high. And the bottom line is they just haven't delivered. The manager's taken a lot of criticism, rightly so in some quarters. The players have taken criticism on this podcast and, on other shows as well. But the collective goal has to be to get better. And, just coming out and basically moaning about not being in the team and making it all about yourself. Not for me. No, you can't do it. You can't do it. It doesn't matter what you've achieved in the past. There are similarities to the Cristiano Ronaldo situation, but Liverpool's oldest adage has always been that there's no one player bigger than the club itself, and even if you don't like the job the manager's doing, you can't break ranks like that for me. So it was absolutely no surprise to me whatsoever that he was left out of the team that travelled to Milan, even though we were short on forwards. And judging by Slot's post-match interview last night, it doesn't sound like a reconciliation is imminent. I do think Salah probably does need to apologise to Arne Slot, or at least find common ground with him. And didn't look like there was too much evidence of that yet. So I'd expect him not to be in the team on Saturday either. And what a great shame that is.
Yeah, can I jump in on one point? This thought that Salah seemed to say that he's been thrown under the bus, that he's been made the scapegoat. I think that is absolutely preposterous. I just think it's ridiculous because he started the first 12 matches of the season when he was playing badly throughout the first 12 matches. The only other players who started those 12 games, correct me if I'm wrong, are Van Dijk, Kanate, and Szoboszlai. So actually, he has been granted, a bit more leeway because of his reputation, and he has been allowed to stay in the team a little bit more. He dropped out against West Ham, and they won. He didn't come on because, and I think Carragher's made the point quite a bit now, they had to defend the lead. Salah's not going to help with that. He then came on against Sunderland when they needed to get a result, because that's what you bring Salah in for. He didn't play well, so he doesn't come back into the team against Leeds. And then again, you're, for the vast majority of the game, not chasing a result, so he doesn't come on, and then he's off. So he's actually, this thought that he's been made a scapegoat, I think it's the opposite. I actually think he's been granted more leeway than most players because of his reputation, and he's kept in the team for weeks and weeks and weeks when he's been underperforming and being so poor. So I just think it was just a complete. I think he's completely detached from reality, Salah, in his assessment of it all.
Yeah, I'd agree with that actually, and I think there has been an idea of this was some sort of emotional outburst, but it was clearly, I think, premeditated and calculated. He knew exactly what the impact would be. He's obviously spoken at certain points in the past when it's suited him. The obvious example being the contract comments of being more out than in. I think that was in November against Southampton. So he knows how much weight his words have, and that leads you to think, or certainly in my case, it leads you to think that it was a very selfish act of trying to make it about him rather than about anybody else, in the sense of, he's been left on the bench for 3 games. He's clearly not happy about that, but he'd had more than enough time to think about it. It wasn't like this interview was immediately after Tanaka's goal goes in and he's on the sidelines frustrated by the team dropping more points, and you kind of explain it away that way. This was 45 minutes, an hour later. He'd had time to cool off. He'd had time to think about it. He actually said to reporters before, sort of 15, 20 minutes before, just going to go in, have a shower, I'll be back. So he had, an extra 20 minutes to think about it on top of that as well. It was a remarkable sort of outburst. And as you say, Rich, it would be a surprise, I think, if he was involved against Brighton at the weekend. But then there's a bigger question as well. Obviously, him going to AFCON, do we see him again? I mean, he was, I think, directly asked, is that going to be the last game? And he sort of spoke about, well, I've told my mum and dad to come to Anfield because it might be the last time that he sees the fans and things like that. Even, prior to this interview, we saw him on the pitch sort of waving to the Liverpool away end. You did wonder whether that, in hindsight, maybe was something along similar lines as well. I mean, it's hard to know exactly what this will look like in the next few weeks. And as we've said, it's going to rumble on and there will be more developments. But what do you think is the next step here? Because it could go either way, really. It could end up with Mohamed Salah being sold. And if that is the case, I mean, what a sad way to go out for a player who is undoubtedly a Liverpool legend.
Mohamed Salah's under contract, isn't he? You know what I mean? So, He's under contract. So he got a 2-year contract at the end of the season. So what makes him think he's going anywhere? That is a decision for the club to make. They might not want to sell him. That you may think to yourself, well, they will sell him if he doesn't want to be there, or there's a breakdown with the manager. But it's a bit presumptuous that the club wants to sell you. Unless you know something we don't, which you could.
That seemed to be the suggestion. He said it several times that somebody at the club, and we did ask him who, and he couldn't really say. But he did say someone wants me out. I mean, that could, as with many things in this interview, could be, completely detached from reality. But I mean, even that was a preposterous thing to say, in my opinion.
I feel like he's actually strengthened the manager's position by doing this, which wasn't what I thought initially. If I'm honest, I just thought, oh my God, he's lost the dressing room. He hasn't got the respect of the players. Whether he's got the obviously Salah's not really showing him respect by doing that interview. That's clear as day. But I do feel like because he stepped out of line, and bear in mind the manager is under a lot of pressure. It is now strengthening his position, and obviously getting a result last night. And I was going to say in fortunate circumstances, but it wasn't really, was it? Yes, the goal, the penalty was fortunate, but the actual way that they played, they were better than Inter Milan. So that strengthened the manager's position. He'll have to go and back that up now by doing something against Brighton, though, because if we get beat by Brighton, you're back to square one. So we've not heard the end of this. I do think I said this at the start. I don't think it's absolutely out of the question that by the new year, neither of them were there. That actually could happen, but that will only be determined by results from Arne Slot's point of view and from Mohamed Salah's point of view, whether he can make peace with the manager. Who goes first? I don't know. It's a bit of a mess, isn't it? But I don't know. It's such a weird situation. I can't. There's been Salah's not the first player who's sort of spoken out or wanted to perhaps. I'm not saying he's forced a move here, but there are other players who have tried to force moves in the past, and perhaps not going around it the best way. But I certainly can't remember anyone coming out and speaking to reporters in this matter. And regardless of what he's achieved in the past 4 years, you can't just brush it under the carpet, can you? It's just impossible. So it's going to be an interesting few weeks. But as you said, Michael, if he doesn't play against Brighton and then he's got a period away from Liverpool, there's time's either going to sort of heal that situation, or it could do the opposite, whereas he goes an extended period without speaking to Arne Slot, which could actually be worse. But it's going to be an interesting few weeks because it could play out in several. I don't think this is mapped out. I feel like this could play out in a couple of different ways, and some of it might be driven by Liverpool's actual results. Because if Salah came back from AFCON and the manager's under extreme pressure or is gone, then the dynamic changes again, doesn't it?
Yeah, all right.
Yeah. One of the questions that I asked him was, what is the next step? Are you going to speak to the manager again? And he kind of said, well, no, we've discussed it, we've had those conversations. But I mean, whether Arne Slot's stance in private is exactly what he said in public, we don't quite know. But obviously, at some point, that's going to have to soften from Salah as well. There's going to have to be some sort of conversation, you would assume, before the Brighton game in terms of what comes next. But I mean, I think the ideal scenario for me, Michael, would be that he can come back from AFCON, make up, play well for the rest of this season, and maybe leave Liverpool in the summer, give everyone a proper goodbye, leave in a way that would kind of be befitting of a player who at that point would have had, 9 incredible seasons with Liverpool, get back into the Champions League, maybe try and win a trophy, get through to the end of the season. And that's, the point at which you go your separate ways. Whatever happens with the manager, the team for the rest of the season, whatever, that kind of would be the ideal scenario. But I mean, it says everything that, if you'd have said a couple of weeks ago, Mohamed Salah will leave Liverpool in January, you'd have just laughed and that wouldn't have even been a thing. Whereas now, that almost seems more likely to happen than what I've just outlined there. So it's almost impossible to know what comes next with this. But have you any inkling of what might the scenario be in the next couple of weeks? Because the January transfer window isn't too far away, but there's an added complication that Mohamed Salah isn't even going to be in Liverpool for a couple of those weeks.
I don't think anyone knows. I suspect Mohamed Salah doesn't know. I suspect Arne Slot doesn't know. So, and I agree with what you said, Rich, that this could go a number of different ways. If I had to guess, if I had to put money on it, I think Mohamed Salah's played his last match for Liverpool, which is an incredible thing to say, really. Even 10 days ago, you would never have believed that 2 weeks ago, but it's just snowballed really quickly. And I think that it could be a scenario that suits everyone, that, listen, Salah gets his move, he probably gets to go and earn even more money, which is an incredible thing to say. Liverpool can get rid of someone who has now become essentially a troublemaker. They can cash in, earn some money on him, and probably reinvest it in a younger option that is going to make them in the short term play better and bring more energy to the team. So that feels like the obvious solution. I think that, look, I mean, like, you two lads are Liverpool fans, and like, I'm not a Liverpool fan, but as a fan of the Premier League, I want to see Mohamed Salah get the ending that his time in this country, in this league, deserves. And to bow out in January under a cloud, having not played well for a number of months, is not the way anyone wants to see this story end. And I hope from his perspective that he does get back in the team, that he does play well again, and that him and Slot can kiss and make up, and this can be resolved. So yeah, I want it. And also, let's have it in public. Let's have them, remember the Kieran Dyer, Lee Boyer shaking hands in public in front of the press? That's what we need. That's what we want. So yeah, let's hope for that.
If it does end like this, Rich, and this, if he has played his last minutes for Liverpool, he goes to AFCON, and when he comes back from AFCON, he plays presumably for a Saudi Arabian team. I think that's probably the only destination that he can go for. Will that change anything in the long term regarding how Liverpool fans look at Mohamed Salah and his legacy? Will that taint it in any way? Or do you think across the course of time, we'll just come to see the career for the 8.5 years that came before that, rather than the sort of 20 minutes of mad interview and ensuing chaos that's come after it?
Well, I think his achievements speak for themselves. I've always maintained the best player I've ever seen wear a Liverpool shirt is Luis Suarez, and he was not short of misdemeanors, let's be clear. You know what I mean? And at one point tried to force his way out of the club to Arsenal. So let's not forget that. And, a couple of my friends always remind me of that, but that, it doesn't change how I felt about what I saw in him as just basically the best footballer I think I've ever seen, if I'm being honest with you. But I was speaking to my nephew on Monday, who's a Liverpool fan, and he was asking me about it, and I said, like, what do you think of it? And his reply to me was heartbreaking. And then I took him out and I thought, wow, yeah, he's not happy there. And, I'm a little bit long in the tooth. I've seen a lot of good and mediocre Liverpool sides. I've seen many, what you'd call Liverpool heroes down the years. And Mo Salah's definitely one of them, but he's not the only one. There's a lot going back. But then I thought about it. So my nephew's 18, and when you look at it, he's probably only really ever known Mo Salah, hasn't he? If you think about it, he would have been 10 or 11 when he joined. So you can watch football from a young age, but your engagement will increase the older you get and go into your teens and whatnot, and build more of a connection with players that you're seeing on the pitch and whatnot. So he'll only really know Mo Salah, and boys and girls of his generation will have only ever known Mo Salah leading this Liverpool side, really. And all of a sudden it's going to end in a bit of a row. So it's a big deal for a lot of people. And I hope it doesn't end this way. And it would be a real shame if it did end this way. There's always hope of reconciliation And I think, well, I hope that door is still open for him. Liverpool, if he does leave, Liverpool will be able to move on because they always have done. They've dealt with greater adversities than, a star player leaving who's 33. That's just a matter of fact. So, the club will always be there. We'll always be there. And players come and go, even great ones. So I feel like it's down to him, really. If he wants to stay, he can try and reconcile with Arne Slot, and he can carry on, and I'm sure he'll score more goals for Liverpool as the team grows in confidence and with a bit of a renewed shape, and tries to put what's been a pretty outrageous first half of the season behind them, if it's possible. I look at these league tables and I still can't believe how in touch Liverpool are with things. You know what I mean? They're very close to there's 3 points off fourth place. The Champions League position in the Premier League. They're now 8th in the Champions League table. The season's not a write-off yet, incredibly, even though it often feels like it is. But they just seem to stumble from one drama to the next, unfortunately. I mean, need a little bit of stability. So you're going to have a period, obviously, regardless of whether Salah plays against Brighton or not, you're going to have a period of him not being in the side. But when he returns, he's going to return him on. I don't know if he can get reassurances. Maybe he was expecting reassurances of being in the team, but I'm not sure a manager will be able to give him that, was he? And I think Egypt qualified for the World Cup as well, didn't they? I think so. He'll have an eye on that as well. So it's difficult, and it's pretty sad, especially after everything that he's achieved for the team and the high regard he's held in by so many people. So I hope for everyone's sake that they can sort it out. But if they can't, we'll just move forward.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting few weeks. I think whichever way it goes, I'm sure we'll speak a lot more on this podcast and various other shows on the Blood Red channel about Mohamed Salah and his future as well. But yeah, the first game will be the Brighton game, and obviously it'll be interesting to see what happens in the press conference on Friday. I'm sure Arne Slot will confirm one way or another whether Mo Salah is going to be involved or not. And I think that in itself will be an interesting and potentially instructive decision ahead of January as well. But I think we'll leave it there for this week. We've spoken at length about a positive that Liverpool have won, a negative that Mohamed Salah has managed to explode and give us a lot of things to think about across the course of the next few weeks at a time when I'm sure Arne Slot would quite like to think about anything but that. But thank you to Rich and for Michael as well for giving me your opinions on all of these things. And we'll be back next week, as ever, with the next Liverpool.com podcast.
This is the Blood Red podcast from the Liverpool Echo, giving you the inside track on all the big talking points from Anfield.